Go.
Hello, viewers. This is Mushfique Fazal Ansari. Welcome you all to our talk show, Real Time with Mushfique. So, our today's guest, eminent human rights activist, writer, journalist, Miss Meenakshi Ganguly, South Asia director. More than a decade, she's working this USA-based international organization. I should say the Nobel Prize-winning organization, Human Rights Watch. And previously she worked for the Time magazine covering Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. So our today's guest, Miss Meenakshi Ganguly. Miss Ganguly, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Miss Ganguly is joining with us from London, and I'm talking with you from Washington, D.C. So you were working for Human Rights Watch for a long time, an overseas organization in the region. Obviously, you are working for Bangladesh. Please give us a sense, what is the country's position on human rights and freedom of expression?
Well, I work on South Asia for Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch works in 90 countries. I work on South Asia, so the seven South Asia countries. And it has been really disappointing to see Bangladesh's decline in the protection of human rights in recent years.
In terms of press freedom index, country's position is 152 out of the 180 countries, and it is behind even the Afghanistan. So why is that? Why is countries going down like that?
Well, the thing is that when I've been working, as you said, I've been working with Human Rights Watch for a long time. So I remember the time when there was a military caretaker government that had come into office in Bangladesh, and both political parties were struggling to restore democracy. Now, at that time, both political leaders, Begum Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina Wazid, had spoken of the need to restore fundamental freedoms. Is that this government seems not very happy with any kind of criticism. Now, this, in any governance, a government needs to associate with civil society, engage with media, and learn to heed critics, because that leads to better governance. Unfortunately, we are finding that not only does this government not want to heed critics, it actually punishes them. So we are finding increasingly that, as you said, this is being reflected in the Press Freedom Index, because what we are finding is that editors are self-censoring, journalists are self-censoring, there are journalists who have been arrested, and journalists are facing threats. And that has led to a decline in press freedom. The government might indicate that there are many channels, many magazines, many online services like yours, but the problem is that almost all of them come under severe pressure if they actually do their job, which is often to shine the light on uncomfortable truths that the government may not be willing to, may not be willing for the public to know about.
Yeah, in that case, I should say the draconian law DSA, Digital Security Act, and they are using this act, on press freedom. And as you said, this government is on zero tolerance on press freedom. And as you know, that they are criminalizing the freedom of expression. So you are from the Human Rights Watch or other organizations. So you are working or communicating with the government. So how does it work? Our government is listening you?
Well, previous to the DSA, there was something called the ICT Act, and Section 56 of the ICT Act in particular. And at that point, we used to keep telling the government that this was being misused, not only against journalists, against press, against any kind of criticism, social media posts, and so on. I mean, many people were being arrested. I remember documenting a case where someone had liked somebody else's post, and even that had led to charges being filed against them. And the government had at that point agreed that the ICT Act was being misused, and had then proposed the Digital Security Act as a way of remedy. Unfortunately, what we're finding is the DSA is being used in worse forms. And of course, it has been used to target journalists as well. And the Editors Guild, the various journalists association, the have protested about this, raised it directly with the government. And in each case, we find that the government has not quite addressed the concerns that are being raised. And instead, what we are also finding is that these kind of arrests are becoming much more rampant. I mean, the cases are extraordinary for people who are just posting something on Facebook, on something on social media. Why is this? Why is the state being so anxious about this kind of posting? And of course, the worst thing of this came about with the death of Mushtaq Ahmed in custody. Again, it was at the time of the pandemic. There was no government in the world that knew how to handle the pandemic well. What was needed was clearly engagement with civil society, because that is the only way states could respond to gaps in how to address this. Now, in that circumstance, when people were pointing to some problems, to then throw people into prison at a time when there was also such risk of this infection spreading through crowded prison populations, for the simple reason that they criticize the government's response, is extraordinary. It is depressing. And of course, in the course of that, not only do we now understand from Kishore, a cartoonist who was arrested at the same time and who met Mushtaq Ahmed in court, where Mushtaq Ahmed described the kind of torture that he had endured, so were others tortured. Kishore himself was beaten so badly that he's lost hearing. Now, why are security forces believing not only that they can detain people and arrest them and jail them for criticizing the government or calling out gaps in government response, but also that they're getting away with this kind of torture? How is this even justified?
Yeah, so one thing is within the country there is, the scenario, but now the government is giving attention the outside the country who are exercising freedom of expression from the abroad. So I'm not defending everyone their statement, but I'm defending their rights. Obviously, you will agree with me. And so from the outside, they are living abroad. Some are exiled in the various countries like USA, UK, and other European countries. So, and government declared sort of war against them, and they are declared that sort of a criminal or something like that, or cyber terrorists, something like that. They are categorizing that. So, what is your comment on that?
Well, what has happened here is that as media houses, media sources within the country begin to self-censor, a lot of Bangladeshis have taken to looking outside for their news, to trust that news. And this is not just here. I remember years ago when I was growing up in India, there was a time when we used to listen to the BBC because we did not always trust what was available within the Indian media situation. So this has traditionally occurred. Even now, BBC Bangla is quite popular in Bangladesh. And similarly, a number of other outlets have become popular. Now, it is nobody's case that the freedom of expression should lead to promotion of hate, to incitement of violence, and for those reasons, the state has the authority to act. But to act against peaceful criticism in this way is extremely distressing, because in the end, it is not just the right to freedom, it is the right to information, which is the right of Bangladeshi people to be informed citizens, which also is affected by sort of curbing people who are criticizing the government from outside the country.
Yeah. Their family also suffering in back home. For instance, probably you noticed that Kanak Sarwar's sister arrested in Bangladesh for. So someone is exercising journalism outside the country, so you are arresting their relatives and sisters and family members. So how you will evaluate this kind of activities by the regime?
Well, this is why it is so shocking. I was reading some of the work that Human Rights Watch does as on Ethiopia, for instance. And one of the things that had happened before in the 2000s, in the early 2000s, used to be reports about this kind of targeting people back home if there were people outside the country that protested. We've seen similar things happen sometimes in Sri Lanka, where people, the diaspora community, has for perhaps protested in London or in UK or Canada, and then their families back home are being attacked. This is just wrong, because first of all, it's wrong because if there is a crime committed, obviously there has to be a due process of law against the person that the government considers to be a criminal. But to punish their relatives is just a severe human rights violation. Now, in the case of Kanak Sawar, for instance, the government may not agree with what he does, and that is a conversation that they have to have with him. To pick up his sister, to threaten him into silence, is just wrong. I've spoken with Kanak Sarwar, and he tells me that his sister is not at all politically affiliated, although she's accused of also supporting his activities. And now, of course, there's some other drug charge against, which is the other problem. That when there are no claims that will not stand up to judicial scrutiny, there are also other cases dumped upon perfectly innocent people and putting them in jail. I hope that the government will immediately release her, not oppose her bail. I think her bail hearing is coming up soon, and they will release her. She has three small children and apparently has no affiliation whatsoever with his work. Now, coming to his work, and this is something that I also want to discuss about Bangladesh, because Bangladeshis are very political people, and they often have, almost like the Americans where you are, a sort of very clearly defined political party loyalties that they express. But to support the opposition in any way is not a crime. That is democracy. That is what would happen on the day that there is an election. If another party comes into power, Awami League supporters should have the right to defend their leader and defend their party or praise it, or all the other political activities that an ordinary Bangladeshi might want to engage in. So therefore, even if they disagree with his politics, even if they disagree with his criticism because they feel is politically motivated, that in itself should not be enough reason to target his family members.
Yes. So you and other human rights organization, about 10 human rights organization, including Human Rights Watch, Robert Kennedy Human Rights, wrote letter to the UN and the US for decisive action for the extreme violation of human rights. What does it mean, the decisive action? And anybody's responding on that?
Well, we are particularly concerned about a culture of extrajudicial executions, or crossfire as they're called, or unenforced disappearances that have been occurring in Bangladesh. This has been going on. Not this is the crossfire killings predates the present government. In fact, years ago, in 2006, I think we talked about RAB, which was created under the previous BNP government, and had spoken about how crossfire was the term that was used, which was when there were cases of extrajudicial executions. And of course, since 2009, there have been hundreds of people who have also become victims of enforced disappearances since this present government came into office. In Bangladesh, in fact, these things have now become ordinary usage. They've entered into ordinary usage. So, since many of your audience is Bengali, I will say it. People will say that if they're picked up, আমাদেরকে crossfire দিয়ে দেবে বা আমাকে গুম করে দেবে. That citizens should fear that a state will kill them or disappear them is really terrifying, and it just should not happen. It really just should not happen. And what we find, I remember again, before during the military caretaker government, I'd once spoken with your Prime Minister, with Sheikh Hasina, and she had spoken about controlling the security forces, and had said to me at that time, the security forces will not commit abuses if there is a strong political leadership that will curb it instantly. Now, we saw some of this happen. I think when Major Sinha was killed by an inspector, after that, and because there was such an uproar about it, because that too was a crossfire killing, again, there was that same narrative. He was carrying a gun, or he was carrying drugs, I forget the details. But after that, because there was such a public outrage, for a period of time, extrajudicial killings came down. These crossfire killings came down. So clearly there is a way to stop them. But that said, when the state denies these abuses, it creates a climate of impunity and a lack of accountability, which gives free pass for security forces to act in the way that they are. And therefore, what we are asking now is that some security forces, the leaders who had held command responsibility when these violations occurred, should be sanctioned by international governments.
So thank you so much, Ms. Meenakshi Ganguly, and thank you for joining with us. And obviously, our viewers will be benefited from our discussion. And thank you
I
for
hope.
joining with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dear viewers, that's all from today, and hope